It's a 69 Chevelle. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have a great day.
Hello everyone and welcome! With the ultra-scale 39 Chevy model car to RC conversion finally complete, it's time to tackle another super scale RC model build. That 39 Chevy Coupe was a fun project, with a very lifelike appearance being achieved in the end. Thanks to a variety of tiny 3D printed drivetrain and suspension components that we make available for download on our Patreon, this nearly 40-year-old yet highly detailed and well-designed model kit was able to come to life. That car featured a lifelike chassis, utilizing one of our MA10 axle assemblies with some 3D printed leaf springs in the rear, and a Mustang 2 style double control arm front suspension. Under the hood there was a pretty nicely detailed big block Chevy. Just ignore that back section of the supercharger, the previous owner of this kit lost that part, not me. Of course, inside there was a fully detailed interior with all of those tiny electronics tucked away very nicely in the fuel tank and trunk. If you want to learn more about that project, I'll post the playlist down below in the description. Overall, a pretty simple, straightforward, and fun project. It's time now though to start a new ultra-scale build. Let's fast forward a full 30 years and have a look at this 1969 Chevelle from Revell. So I'm sure you're either thinking, heck yeah, a 69 Chevelle SS, one of the most iconic muscle cars of all time. Or, really, another Chevy? What the heck? Of course only one of those opinions is correct, but in all seriousness, I did specifically choose this model kit for a number of reasons. First, I do like the look of these 69 Chevelles. Really any year Chevelle for that matter, even some of the really early and later years that don't seem to get as much love as the late 60s and early 70s models. I picked this one up from a local hobby shop a while back, not too long after its release, maybe a couple years ago. If I understand correctly, the tooling for this kit was done within the last few years, resulting in a crisp, well-detailed, and well-fitting model. A similar 1968 model year Chevelle SS is also available. Many of the model kits that you'll see on hobby store shelves from manufacturers like Revell are simply reissues based on tooling that could be decades old. You can see the history of many of these model kits on websites like ScaleMates, which seems to be a pretty good source of information. As an example, you may recall that 65 Shelby GT350 I built a little while back, as well as that recently finished 39 Chevy. Both of those kits that I had just so happened to be from the 1980s, but you can find much more recent issues of those kits on store shelves right now, such as this 66 Shelby GT350H and 39 Chevy Delivery, which basically use all of the same parts that were present in those older issues that I used for my builds. Now there's not necessarily anything wrong with repopping decades-old kits. I was overall really happy with both of them, and I would expect the more recent issues of them to be just as good, but sometimes the quality, fitment, and details present on these older kit designs are less than exceptional to say the least. Your job as the model builder can become a bit more difficult trying to get the car to look its best. For lesser experienced hobbyists, or those not in the know, this can present some frustration and confusion, as while this is a common practice among many model kit manufacturers, it's not always apparent anywhere on the packaging how dated the parts inside might be. Some hobbyists have had the experience of building a kit just like this 69 Chevelle that you see here, a modern, crisp design, then head back to the hobby shop, see a similarly priced, recent release from Revell like this 1981 Camaro, only to open it up and find far fewer parts, which are less detailed, and are those plastic tires? Unknowingly, they purchased a reissue of a much older kit design, and in this specific case, one that was initially a snap kit. Still potential here for a great build, and in this specific case, in defense of Revell, they probably should have paid closer attention to the skill level and part count. But you could probably start to understand the potential for some frustration among more casual hobbyists not in the know about reissues and the actual age and quality of some of the tooling. The good news is today we have resources like ScaleMates to see the history of these model kits and whether or not it's actually new tooling, and of course we have YouTube where we can view unboxings and reviews of probably just about any model kit on the market right now. As you can see here though, this kit looks great. Well molded parts and lots of detail. I especially like those pad printed Firestone tires. Like on that Chevy Coupe, I like that the frame is a separate part, rather than the chassis just being a single piece that includes things like the floor pans and inner fenders. Unlike the 39 Chevy Coupe though, the fuel tank is not attached to the chassis. On that car, the fuel tank ended up being a great spot to hide the ESC and receiver, and all I needed to do was run a couple of wires up to the trunk for the battery. One of the things I'm thinking about is serviceability. When you're building a static model, you just glue everything together, generally with no intention of the car ever needing to be taken apart. But ideally, I would like to have access to the electronics and suspension, just in case something needs to be replaced. While I would like to venture more outside of the realm of vintage muscle cars and hot rods at some point, I already have an assortment of parts like live axles and simple double control arm front suspension assemblies that are very well suited to older American cars like this. Engine in the front and a live axle in the rear is a pretty simple design that's not too difficult to replicate with RC components in 1/25th scale. I'm always trying to experiment with some different parts and test out some new ideas. Check out one of my recent videos where I talk a bit about some potential ideas for a front steer axle for some ultra scale 4x4 truck model to RC conversions. But for this build, I'm keeping the drivetrain and suspension simple and to what I know. With that said, I am going to try to replicate the specific multi-link rear suspension and double control arm front suspension that was used on the real 69 Chevelle as best as I can here. I asked you guys at the end of that 39 Chevy build if you think I should once again limit myself to only using pre-existing STL files that we've posted on Patreon, or if I should design some new components. Pretty much unanimously, you want to see some more custom designed parts, so my plan right now is to break out the 3D scanner and see how well I can tailor some parts to this specific frame. Of course, if things don't quite go to plan, I can always just cut the front of the chassis and sort of graft on one of our front suspension and steering assemblies, just like I did with that Shelby GT350. I'm going to try to make the chassis look as much like the real thing as I can, but it's always nice to have a plan B in case things don't quite work out. Another advantage with choosing a Chevelle is being a relatively large mid-size American coupe, there will be plenty of room to hide all of the electronics. Honestly though, with some of the electronics that we have available now, they could probably fit well onto just about any car of this scale and still allow enough room for a full interior and engine bay. I was doing a bit of testing and research to see if I could fit a 2S LiPo battery and compatible ESC. However, I love how tiny you can get these 1S LiPo packs. While there are certainly some small 2S packs out there, comparatively, they're sort of large, and I think on this project, I'm just going to stick with 1S. I'm just going to have this build be all about looks, making it as lifelike as possible. But in the future, I do think it would be cool to crank the performance meter up just a tad bit, with little to no sacrifice on the lifelike appearance of the car. Of course, you can just do away with the interior and lifelike chassis design altogether if you just want to go fast, but I've already done builds like that, and that's not what I'm wanting to do here. I will be adding some lights, just as I've done on some prior projects. That'll be one thing on this Chevelle that should actually be easier to do than it was on the 39 Chevy. As you may recall on that car, the lights are sort of externally mounted, if that makes sense, rather than being integrated into the body like cars from this era or even today would be. That made adding lights to the car a bit more of a challenge, but honestly, I think they turned out pretty good if I say so myself. This Chevelle should be pretty easy and straightforward by comparison, but I'm not trying to tempt fate here. I hope you all enjoyed this little announcement and unboxing of my next highly detailed super scale model car to RC conversion. Much like the GT350 and 39 Chevy, I'll be showcasing this project step by step in a detailed multi-part series. Work has already begun on the drivetrain and rear suspension for this Chevelle, so keep an eye out for those videos popping up on the channel soon. Until then though, as always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.